Kia ora tātou. It's 9:30 now, and it's our official start time for our meeting this morning. And I'm happy to start us in karakia. Nō reira, kia karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki pai. E hiake ana te ātākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Kia ora tātou, and thank you all for joining us today. Also, greetings to our kaimahi that are here to support us throughout the hui. I'd also like to just advise the committee that this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the website. So due to technical difficulties, we're unable to live stream at this time, but we're working through that. Can we have confirmation that the meeting is being recorded, please?
Yes, it is. I've got it all now.
Okay. So I don't think we've got any guests with us, but in the event that the fire alarm goes off, the exit, as we know, is down the stairwell to the assembly point, which is the visitor car park. Earthquakes, the advice we have here is to drop, cover and hold. We don't have any visitors with us, but we do have a couple of apologies. Our apologies are Jonathan Erickson and John Blackwell. I also would like to note that Deanne will be joining us from about 9:35. Can I please have a mover for the apologies? Moved by Jack and seconded by Joe. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion carried. Are there any declarations of interest that the members of the committee would like to make? If there are any that come up throughout the agenda, please feel free to raise them to the awareness of the meeting. Moving on from there, we have the confirmation of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee minutes from the 29th of November 2023. We also have the Investment and Property Subcommittee minutes from the 29th of November 2023. Just a note that this is our inaugural Audit, Risk and Finance Committee meeting, and so we will be covering those minutes off as part of this inaugural meeting. Does anyone have anything to raise regarding the minutes of the Audit and Risk Subcommittee before we move and second them?
Want me to move?
Kia ora, moved by Joe.
Second.
Second, ka pai. Seconded by Jeff. All those in favour?
No.
Those against? Motion carried. Moving on to the Investment and Property Subcommittee minutes from the 29th of November. Does anybody have anything in the minutes of that meeting that they'd like to raise before we move and second them and put them to a vote?
I think you've probably got almost a quorum of that particular meeting here too. So just have a look for procedural stuff. We're probably almost there. Three.
Oh, four, Steve.
Yeah,
no,
so
we're right.
Yeah, we're right.
Yep.
So that helps you procedurally.
Okay. If there's no further comment on the minutes, I think everything's covered off in the action schedule anyway. But can we please have a mover for the investment and property subcommittee meeting held 29 November 2023 to confirm those minutes as true and correct. Jack. And a seconder, please. Jeff. Kapai, all those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion carried. Kia ora tātou. We'll now move to the receipt of the action sheet on page 15. Are there any comments or contributions with regard to the action? Kia ora, Deanne, nau mai haere mai. So that's on page 15, and the recommendation is that the action sheet be received. Does anybody have any comments regarding the action schedule before we receive it? A motion? If there's no comments right now, we can receive it, and if something comes to mind, I'm happy for us to talk about it if anyone wants to. Can I have a mover that the action sheet is received, please? Moved by Joe. Would anyone like to second that motion? Seconded by Jeff. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Motion carried.
Don't know, there's only one voice,
Yeah,
might have got through.
is everyone,
Authoritative voice.
is there anyone against the motion? Can't play. I think we've got that. So that motion is carried. In terms of the action sheets, just mindful that this is now a combination of actions that historically came from the Audit and Risk Subcommittee and the Investment and Property Subcommittee. So just mindful now that those actions have been combined into a single schedule of actions for this committee to cover off. Any comments that you'd like to make, Bruce?
No, Chair, other than everything's been completed or there's an update on following item 6.1 on any actions we have undertaken further.
Right. Moving along to item 6.1, and that is for Bruce to speak to, and it's the meeting action update. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair. Are you happy that it's taken as read, and I'm happy to answer any questions?
Hapai. He pāpai, he kōrero rānei wā tātou. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I have a brief one for Bruce on action 2 about the AI. How much are we limited in our ability to take action by the list of legislation that we have to work with being so ancient? Most of it doesn't seem to be particularly useful to us, really, or not updated enough for us. Is that a problem for
And I think that's where we've actually gone to the developing a policy. So item 6.9 provides a policy because, as you say, this technology is newer than the existing legislation.
Yeah, I didn't notice even in 6.9, it seems like we're kind of really shooting in the dark a bit, aren't we? Good point.
Although the principles of data management and how we utilize AI do flow back through our current policy. And you've looked at the attached policy on information management, which is a draft at the moment because it's been reviewed. That does reflect kind of principles about the correct storage and privacy, all those type of things. And that's reflected in our policy in item 6.9.
So we'll have a look at that 6.9, shall we? Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Any further comments before we sort of look at the other items? I mean, my only contribution around Action 2 is that sort of evolved after we had used AI to support our development of a draft policy for environmental land acquisition. And my concern that I raised there was around data sovereignty. And we know that by and large, the data that is used in those circumstances to generate responses is not data that is curated or fair in terms of Indigenous land history, and or takes into account the way that data is aggregated. And so those were the concerns. I think that there's still work to do on the AI policy, and I think it needs to take into account that there would continue to be questions around authorship, particularly when we might use AI to support us in the development of policy. That was the original concern that I raised. So who would be the author of that policy? And if we are going to use AI to develop policy, is it important that we have a policy team anymore? So those are the sorts of questions I think that the public might be interested in. Kia ora.
Yeah, I just wonder, Chair, if this council's got a system that, unbeknown to councillors, of monitoring councillor email and communication traffic. Because I do know previously when I was on the council that did occur. And I just wonder if there is a policy, sort of some natural justice stuff, that if we are being monitored, we should know what the regime is. I'm not saying that we are, but I'd like to know if we are.
For clarification,
our mailboxes are monitored, that we should know. There could be an issue that might justify it, but there should be a process that the chair at least is informed and aware of what's going on.
For clarification purposes, are you raising concerns that there may be breaches of privacy where access to your inbox is concerned?
Or see, yeah, I'm just asking that if this does happen, one policy is there a policy? Gone through the policies, haven't seen a policy. Maybe it's a policy that it doesn't happen.
Perhaps the CEO might like to make a comment in that regard.
Kia ora, Chair. My understanding is we don't have a specific policy on monitoring people's emails, whether they're councillors or staff. We could develop a policy if that is useful. We do have the ability to access and search people's email accounts, but there would need to be an incident that we decide that that's appropriate, and from natural justice we would be engaging with whoever's email it was to be able to engage with them prior to doing that.
There you go, you've given us your policy. I like it.
Yeah. So we don't, like, I don't expect staff to be monitoring mine, just like you don't expect them to be monitoring yours. There needs to be, like, sometimes I can think in the past where there may have been breaches of confidentiality and materials got outside of the organisation. I know there's been complaints in previous councils where we've then gone and done an investigation, and part of that, the natural justice part, is that you engage with the person who that is the claim's been made. Then we would go and say, hey, look, we need to go and search through that, and we don't do it as a course proactively in any shape or form.
But Lagoima, of course,
Bruce, that's double checking to make sure that what I've just said is
Absolutely correct.
doesn't, under Lagoima, any and all emails that are written by anyone with an NRC address can discoverable, aren't they? So we have to be aware of that. That's obviously the caveat, isn't it? So we have to be aware of that at all times.
But the situation, in that situation, we would go to all of those people who we thought the Lagoima covered, and we'll go, hey, can you please check through your emails and provide any of that material to us so that we can include it in the Lagoima response. I would imagine there'd need to be an exceptional situation where we don't think we're actually getting the information, that would again have to sit down with the person involved, whoever, whether it's staff or councillors, to have that corridor before we'd actually go
And I think
Get that
it's
access.
important to recognise at this point that those are two different circumstances.
Yeah.
One is a request for information, which Councillor Craw is raising to our attention, and Councillor Joe is raising to our attention a concern around privacy. And so those two circumstances are different, because one would assume unauthorized access to someone's email, and one would be governed by the official information request, which of course happens initially by someone making a request and pulling that lever. So just to be clear, those are two separate circumstances.
So Chair, what our CEO has told us, it gives me complete comfort. And I just think we want something really simple, a couple of phrases, and that's a policy.
I think so.
And-
Straightforward.
Yeah.
Very
And
happy.
I'm perfectly satisfied, I just think that's great.
We can
Cheers.
do that, Chair, if
Now-
you'd like to make sure we've got it documented, I guess.
And I could accept in some circumstances, and I expect the chair to be notified, if there's something that's criminal and we think of a disclosure in which we've made a contractual commitment about, that perhaps the councillor isn't informed at the time something's made, but I expect to see the chair notified, I think we could get something there.
Got a Chair, very happy to document that and bring it back.
Chair, I was just wondering, Chair, if you'd be happy for us to circulate that draft via email for comment.
I'm fine with that. Yeah, I mean,
Just to
and then just as an initial sort of step forward, that'll be great.
Sorry, and though trying to create more work for the management team, which we hope we're not doing, is do all of the councillors have disclaimers on your emails?
I don't think I've got one. Sorry.
Because that would mitigate your policy, just in terms of risk. Hey, Jono, so all the staff have disclaimers, correct?
On the auto signatures, yes.
Yes, on the auto signatures. So councillors would have disclaimers on their auto signatures? No?
Only
so I think-
to do so.
Yes, I think we need to look at that, because that would mitigate any policy.
NRC.
Yeah, that's right.
Cancel any policy or mitigate it.
It would both. It would act as your policy, and it would also act as your mitigation in a court of law.
Oh, cheers.
Just to clarify though, the disclaimer in our emails was more around the content of the email.
No, and the
Right.
access to. So that's what I'm saying. If you've got a disclaimer, if the councillors are concerned that a disclaimer that whatever's in that email should only for the person that intended, right? If that's what your disclaimer has. So if the disclaimer does not have that, then I'd question ensuring that we have a disclaimer that says it's only for the intention and purpose it is used for, and for the purpose it is person it is sent to. That way, then your investigation cannot be done without the approval
Consent.
of the councillors.
We can review both at the same time.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Deanne. So we've covered off those two items. I mean, like, I'm just in terms of action two, I think that needs further work. I'm not going to go into the detail around why, but particularly around the Māori data sovereignty aspects of it. Anything further?
Chair, if I can just make a comment there, Chair. There is work undergoing nationally in that space for the Māori data sovereignty, which is also being worked on by the regional sector. So And we reported that, I think, in the last meeting.
Yes.
So happy to bring back updates as they come to the table. To inform the committee.
I'm looking at a particular portion of the draft policy. Sorry, what page is that on? I have some notes on it. If we want to go into further detail.
It is on page 83.
Right. Well, we can probably cover that off when we get there. But yeah, that's on 83. Okay, anything further, Bruce, that you'd like to speak to in terms of the action update or any questions from the meeting participants?
Mr. Chairman, are we also referring, this item also, is this covering the attachments as well? We're going to deal with into
They appear to be separate in the in the agenda, but would you like to make a comment, Bruce?
They're just attached there to show or reinforce what my comments are, that we've actually got that whistleblower policy in place. It's there so you can see it. That we do have a draft under revision records management information policy in place.
Yeah.
Happy to, and the full policy, but happy to take any comments.
Oh, my only comment was just to reinforce Peter Lucas' point about data sovereignty. I think, I think we may have to have a multi-point approach to this rather than just one bold statement, because it's going to affect us. It's going to affect all levels of government, national, local level, regional level. And we need to be as watertight as we can be, just for lots of reasons, but one of them is risks to the organisation.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to raise, because it is connected to the legislation that you raised to our attention, but we're also mindful that what is fair use? How do we determine fair use? And for example, a lot of the data that council hold about land that is owned by landowners don't ordinarily have fair access to that information unless they know how and where it's curated or how it's catalogued. And so I think it's important for us to just understand that.
Sorry, through the chair, so the whistleblowing draft development, is that, are you dedicating a work program around that, Bruce and Jono, around what happens post policy, where others have included whistleblower policies? There has been, teething problems in terms of operating that out, and where people see it as a let's just go and nag on my boss scenario. Is there a work program that sits alongside that, Jono?
There's no specific work program that sits alongside that. I'm trying to recall if we've had any incidents of whistleblowing. Can't recall any. But I do note that there is in the policy, it does talk about malicious sort of whistleblowing, and that's there. But no, we don't have a program per se.
Would you like to make a comment?
Deanne, are you referring to, is there a program of awareness to make sure our staff are aware of the policy and understand what it provides and all
Yes.
and like there's no point having a policy if no one knows
That's
about it. Ka pai. I think that's something that we could do more on, and something that we can note down as, yes, we've got the policy, and yes, I'm sure we have probably promoted it when it was first developed, but it's something that we could do more on to make sure that our staff are aware of its existence and what it supports. Good point.
At a very broad level, this conversation evolved out of a discussion that was related to fraud, corruption, and dishonesty, and the risks associated with that, and what mechanisms were in place for staff that might feel unsafe to make information known, and what pathways they could make information known. Going to the authorities, of course, is one, Speaking to the CEO is another. There is the option of raising it directly with the chair of the council. And I've said that I'm happy to be contacted in the event that somebody within the organisation feels that it's necessary to raise something related to those 3 areas to the attention of somebody that would do something. Whether or not staff are aware of those options, I'm not sure, and I think there was going to be some thought given to how that might be articulated.
Yes, Chair. Just on the next item, 6.2, you'll see that we do have fraud, corruption and dishonesty staff awareness training schedule for this year. And we have done that previously. So that would incorporate the elements of how to report whistleblowing, and we get an independent trainer to come in and scroll down through the whole organisation.
So that's thank you.
And that's done on an annual basis. Sorry, Chair, through you. That's done. We do that on a regular annual basis. That training and awareness.
I'm not sure it's annual, but I have to go back and check.
Okay. I am aware that it does happen on a regular frequency, because I know I remember going through it myself on a reasonably frequent basis.
Councillor Joe?
Yeah, instead of spending a lot of money on just one little post to put in the toilet. Say, hey, this is it. You don't need to spend a whole lot. You just say, this is what you can do if something's worrying you. You know, usually people in organisations have a discussion with their peers. Very seldom you find someone come forward with some burning concern that there's not some peer support.
I think just through the chair, current case law shows that that whistleblowers have become more victimised than they are actually exonerated for actually raising issues. And in ministries down in Wellington, it also has been in the last evidence of evaluation of whistleblowing education is that they have, and that's where I sit in other RAC committees, is that it becomes more of a mechanism to moan about your boss. So education to me is critically important to ensure that we get it right, that the mix is quite right. So we're not at the extreme victimising the whistleblower, and we're not at the extreme with just a nagging point. So I get what you're saying, don't spend a lot of money on it, but actually it will cost us a lot of money in terms of risk if we end up in court with someone.
Kia ora, Jack.
Just a couple of little pedantic matters perhaps for you, Bruce. In the fraud, corruption and dishonesty control policy.
What page are you speaking to, Jack?
31. Specifically further down, and 33 talks about a fraud limitation officer. Using the word limitation can be seen as being accepting of a certain level of fraud. I just think maybe we could have a slightly more appropriate term than limitation. No, it's just pedantic. But you might want to look at. But my other question on that is, if the fraud limitation officer was her or himself subject to scrutiny, then what's the procedure? I guess it would just default straight to the CE, wouldn't it? But it should state that somewhere in the policy.
It's generally one up.
Sorry?
It's generally one up. So you go above.
Yeah, I think it should state that. I don't think it does.
Happy to make that amendment.
Yeah, thank you. And also the word, as I say, limitation didn't seem like quite the right term to me. Pedantic as hell on it.
So Chair, Steve, you mean one over the person that you're concerned with?
Well, if it were the CE, then it would go to the chair.
Oh, yeah, no.
And generally, there is an option to go to the chair of audit and risk if the mechanisms in place and the personalities involved require another place to have that conversation. There are a couple of other things there, Jack, which also include going to the authorities. But yeah, I'm happy to receive the report, and if there's no further comments on the other actions, perhaps we can speak in more detail once we get to those particular policies further on in the agenda. do we have a mover for the, meeting actions update?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
That's moved by, Joe and seconded by Jack. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Kia ora. Yeah, and I'd just like to welcome George. Tēnā koe, George. Nau mai ki tēnei hui tuatahi o tēnei komiti. Kua whakamoea te komiti o te audit and risk ki te property investment. Nā reira iaia nei ko tahi te komiti. Nō reira nau mai haere mai. Just like to extend a welcome to George. Our next item on the agenda is the internal audit schedule. Did you want to raise something? No, next time. Okay. And we will be hearing from Mandy Tepania, who's our audit and assurance lead. Tēnā koe, Mandy.
Kia ora. Taking the report as read, is there any questions?
I noticed that we had an insurance review done about 2-3 years ago, and referring to a later paper that's been put in amongst the documents, whether that would suffice for this time around, because they've done a deep dive on insurance covering that, and whether, you know, we kill two birds with one stone and take that off as insurance review undertaking that we completed.
Do you, any comment or?
Absolutely support that approach if the members think it's appropriate.
So it's clear that the members agree there's benefit in what has been suggested by Steve. Is that in action now for follow-up? Apai? Any further comments regarding the internal audit schedule?
So through the chair, the internal audit schedule, thank you. Is this in line with the audit report or management report from the last financial year?
That's the external audit that's undertaken by
Yep.
Deloitte. So that sits separately to our internal audit program. So we have the external audit program and an internal audit.
So my question, Bruce, is does it sit in hand? Because you get an external that will drive what you look at in your internals sometimes? Is that not
No,
how it
so-
operates here?
No.
So
we have-
how do you report back to the external from
well,
this?
The external audit is the statutory audit.
Yes.
So it's done for our long-term plan and our annual plan. We have an internal audit program that focuses on the activities that aren't audited under that program.
Oh, so that's the answer to the question, is that you're doing a program that's not relative to that program?
Yeah. Falls
Okay.
the void, because the statutory audit doesn't cover all of these components in detail. So this is a deep dive.
Okay, through the chair, I see that's a risk. I think there should be some alignment. I'm just saying it should be some alignment. I know this is a deeper dive, but there should be some alignment from what the external to what the internal does, as well as.
My recollection that our auditors have occasionally suggested staff to have a burrow into an area. That's beyond them, they've actually given that pointer on. And is that part of their regular brief, but to any others, they,
Oh, yeah, chair, through chair.
Yeah.
So there are management findings in the external audit reports, then we do act on those, and then they can actually drop down into the internal audit program.
Yeah.
But as you know, our audit findings from external audit, you generally get one of that recommendation from those audits, right? There's not a lot of findings from those that come back as in the management report.
So would that mean that if there are findings from the external audit that they could form a part of, albeit a temporary sort of internal audit focus, so that we do get that sign off.
That's correct.
Kia ora, Chair, just to provide confidence, what the external and the internal audit, they look at different things. The external audit, every single one of those actions are reported to council, and every single one of those actions have a follow-up management response to them. Some of them may flow down into the internal audit program. Most of them have a specific bit of work that we need to do to upgrade our systems and processes, or whatever the feedback is. So I guess, yes, there is a level of integration, but I guess what Bruce is trying to say is our internal audit goes a lot further than what our external audit is. That's why they don't have a high level of integration, because we're looking at slightly different things. We're doing a deep dive into areas that the external audit otherwise doesn't do. But the point you raise is right. And I guess we have quite thorough reporting back on our external audits, and any of those actions, we've got a management response, and it's followed up and delivered on. And we can document and show where that is.
Comment from Bruce?
And just to confirm also, those external audit reports come through the same committee, as does the proposed audit schedule.
Okay, and just for clarification, the process that an item is moved on to the audit schedule is what exactly, just for the clarification of the meeting?
Yeah, staff
Because they don't all come from recommendations or signals from the auditor. Some of them do, but there are other ways that something arrives on the audit schedule.
Correct, that's correct.
So,
the management will come up with recommendations. Essentially, we're putting them in front of you here.
Yeah.
So this is the proposed audit schedule, and we receive your feedback and justice.
Through Mr. Chair, so we've also got an executive leadership team, audit risk and health and safety group that has a look in, and so Bruce will bring those to us based on risk, and we'll then use that as a support for Bruce to then recommend it to this committee that it goes on the internal audit schedule. So we do a risk-based assessment as well of what parts of the business should have a internal audit as part of their program.
Do you then have an operational handbook for staff for your internal audit processes?
You're talking about the procedure and the template and what they go through when they do an internal audit?
Yes, and how that, or the ops handbook and policy compliance that feeds into the internal audit.
We for our internal quality system, there is a detailed procedure, I'd call it, Mandy, as to like what we look to audit internally.
Yes.
We're looking at the various programs. So I think if that's what you're referring to, George.
Something in that order, yes, please,
Yeah,
Bruce.
we do. Yes, for that, for the quality system, yes.
So there's a program of work, there's a methodology to each of the work that's undertaken.
Correct. And if you look at the bottom of page 38, under the pathway to Murahi Tika quality review, that's what I'm referring to. That's that program there that Mandy's referenced.
Can we use ISO auditors, accredited auditors, when we're doing the quality review?
So through the chair, I would prefer to see an ISO report, not, sorry, just for the councillors, because if you're using I love ISO, sorry. If you're using ISO as your platform of auditing risk and the risk schedule, you're not using it.
No,
You're just using the framework.
we're using.
Excuse me, just because I know all of the history of this, we used to be ISO accredited, so we've got a number of trained ISO auditors on staff.
Okay, so we're not using ISO.
Not anymore.
We weren't getting benefit from the program and we decided to pivot away from it.
I was not primarily looking at, so in your document, sorry, through the chair, we don't actually have in this internal audit schedule who's the owner, who's mitigating what. We've just got status, and that's a risk to the council laws because they can't see who's actually managing this, except for, lovely, thank you for providing that report. So just maybe if we don't adopt using ISO, because it is expensive, we adopt the framework that they have, which then allows some comfort to the council laws that they know who's doing what when.
And are you speaking to the responsible person
Yes.
for the mitigation of that specific item in the
The
schedule?
mitigation and the owner of those situations. And then the councillors who are the governors have comfort that they know who is responsible if it all goes belly up.
Is that a reasonable suggestion to the meeting? That we would identify who is responsible? And then we would be at least further along the way of aligning ourselves with a framework that we are partially following or applying.
I think that's a good idea. It's developments like this that I see sense in, and a lot of our stuff we had in previous meetings, it's come forward. It's just like someone's been paid by the word to do, and something like this to me is a lot more relevance. Yeah.
Kia ora, Chair. Just so I'm clear, it is the discussion to bring the framework that our auditors use when we're doing the audit to bring that back to the committee, so you can see what the framework is and come by. That's appropriate to bring to governance. And then is the request that the actual reviews of them and the findings of mitigation and the owners then come back to the committee after we've done the review. And it also seems reasonable to me as well. And
it may well be another column in the table with the person and team responsible for that particular.
And I think Bruce just said,
we do bring those internal audit reports back to this committee. But we can add a column with the names of who's responsible. That's fine.
That might, would that
I think that is fine. That would be lovely.
So
Councillors.
ask a question then. So really, something like that is almost should be confidential, because you actually pose a risk. The public knows there's some person they can actually try to get around because they're covering off a certain aspect. I just wonder whether that should actually be confidential, non-disclosed part of our agenda.
Yeah,
I think it's a good point to raise, and we'll go away and consider that and make sure we have a good look at that before we bring anything back onto the next agenda with people's names written there.
Generally, just in my experience, it's non-confidential, and that I'm saying that from a national government point of view. If you are the risk holder, then you are the risk responsible, then you are publicly responsible for that risk. So I'm not sure, but I'll leave it.
I suspect my name will be on most of
Big bold capitals.
Yeah.
And
Could I just comment? Yeah. You know, at a council, it can happen that you have some people that actually try to attack and put enormous pressure on individuals, you know, and we're far north's got one incumbent resident in their district spends their life doing stuff like this. Actually lives near where George is. You'll know exactly who I'm talking about.
Mr. Weaponiser.
Yeah, and I've seen weaponisation of staff is terrible.
Yes, I agree.
well, that's a risk in itself that will need to be considered alongside learning who is responsible for carrying out the mitigation of any of these items in the audit schedule. Okay, is there any further kōrero regarding this particular item, 6.2, the internal audit schedule? If there's no further comments, could I please ask that we have a mover for the recommendation that the report internal audit schedule by Mandy Tepanya, audit and assurance lead and dated 16th of February 2024 be received. That's moved by Jack and seconded by Deanne. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? The motion is carried. Kia ora. Thank you, Mandy. Our next item is 6.3, which is on page 42, and that is the litigation schedule half-yearly report, which is July to December 2023.
Chair, we're looking at this
Yes, there has been an additional piece of information that has been printed out for you. And I've asked that it be put alongside your seat. And that's additional information with regard to this item that we are now at on the agenda, which is item 6.3. And I will now ask Bruce to speak to this item. Kia ora, Bruce.
Kia ora, Chair. This item came around as a result of a request from the subcommittee, wanting to see what litigation is currently happening in council, and also wanting to know what is the associated cost of litigation. When the report was initially prepared, the costs that were tabled for those items relating to the schedule, this revised schedule here, were only done on the quarterly basis. This table has been updated for the full costs to date for those items. And most of the litigation is in relation to our responsibilities under Audit compliance, monitoring and enforcement roles. And Colin's here, and I can speak to those items. And we also have one civil claim in place that's noted under Colin's group as well. And then under the corporate services group, we are taking action to recover outstanding fees associated with the marine biosecurity charge. Any questions, Chair?
And I asked, because I don't have a copy of the financials, the forecasted budget, sorry, and I'd like a copy of that. What the reason being why it relates to the litigation is I'd like to know what was budgeted for legal fees on potential litigations, because that's important for us to know that one, as an audit risk committee that we're and financial committee that we're under the bar in terms of what we're spending, or if we're over budget. I'm not sure. I don't see that. And I don't have any papers to say that. So maybe if we could have our financial statements, our P&L, and
that's a request that has come through the chair. So we will deal with that first before we move any further. So we've had a request for information, financial information, to align this information with budget. Is it possible to get the member the information that would help with that?
Certainly, we can run a report and provide that information. I think the chair might be good if Colin could comment as well.
I'm just wanting to deal with that one thing because that's really around P&L, that's around budgeting, that's about numbers. And the member has raised to our attention that numbers aren't here. So that's, are you identifying that as?
It's actually a risk that we don't, thank you. This is good. Year to date, and just by note, it's not year to date if it says 31st of December 2024, because we're not 31st of December. I'm just very picky on numbers. Thank you for that. I think the reality is I can't give you a measure on whether or not we're on budget or over budget, because that's part of the Audit, Finance and Audit Risk Committee, if I don't know what the number is.
Kapai, before you speak, Colin, we're going to address this because this is an important item, I think, and it's around the numbers. So what would be our action moving forward, or what would be our follow-up? Is there a suggestion here?
Chair, happy to run the numbers and circulate those, but it may not provide the full picture unless Colin also comments on how we actually budget for this work as well.
So can I maybe make a suggestion on that? I would have expected if our committee would have a P&L and a balance sheet as part of their paperwork, and it would have been a month out. So it's not up to year to date. It would have been a month out. It would have been up to the end of February. We are now February. We were end of January. Sorry, and then that would give me comfort sitting here knowing that Colin is up to date in terms of what's on budget.
Okay, I think that's an important contribution there for us to reflect on. Any further comments on that?
One question would be, is there a budget?
Oh, yeah.
First one. That would be the first question. So we'll start with that.
Essentially, that's it. I think that's my chair.
Yeah, absolutely. But having the information that has been suggested would answer the question about whether there is a budget. Because I think asking somebody a question and then of course getting a reply is one thing. Citing the information in black and white is what I'm hearing from the member is important.
Through you, Chair, the financial report that was tabled yesterday could also have been available for today's meeting.
That's noted. And can we please make sure that we include that financial information in the meeting agenda moving forward? Yeah, and just on that note, if anybody needs that information, it is publicly accessible, but we will do our best to make sure it's combined into the paperwork for this meeting as well. Important feature of our responsibilities is to be across that, and I take on board the comments from the members. Kia ora, Colin.
Thank you through the chair, and Marina Koto, everyone. Just going back to the update, I think it should actually read 31 January, because I think I did update those numbers until 31 January this year. Recognising that January tends to be a quite critical for many people.
On holiday.
January on this one.
Same figure.
Was that a mistake?
Well, I think there was 2 tables that just hasn't reflected that it was updated to 31 January.
Well, just for the record, we have a paper here that does have a column that says total cost for 31 December 2024. And for the purpose of clarification, is that what the member is referring to?
Yes, is that it should be whatever the yield to date is on that one.
Okay, can't wait. Okay, just so I'm clear that I'm on the right page as well. Kia ora. Thank you.
Yes. So going back to the question of budgeting, we have a nominal budget for our legal system. It's inherently, it's like crystal ball gazing, particularly on enforcement matters, because we can't predict what cases we take in advance. And that will be dictated largely by the actions of the defendant in many ways. So we have a nominal budget. So we do report those, but we also report, so we do that through the normal process for your actual report. So it's not a very, because the other thing with particularly things like prosecution, they can span over different years, and it swings and roundabouts, because we also then look at, if you wanted to, a true picture, if you like, then you'd take a look at any if we're successful, any fines as well. So inherently it's very difficult, and so historically we've found when we tried to do that, it's just we then had to report on variances when it almost didn't have much meaning to try to budget for it, just because of the uncertainty, other than that nominal one where we could at least identify unders and overs.
Yeah, I mean, I bring comfort to the councillors that you've done a pre-forecast. I think pre-forecasts are okay to put into budget. So nominal, doesn't matter what it is, as long as there's one there. If we do unders and overs, that's normal practice, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. So thank you. So you do budget for it is the answer to the question.
Yeah.
Cover.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair. I think we can definitely, before the next meeting, make sure that our next agenda's got that information in it, but let's not wait until then. We can definitely send something out between now and then. We can run the numbers, we can show what the budget is we've got. We can also in there just articulate what sort of columns as to how we've worked our budget. And also maybe if we can just go back. So I'm keen to also get an understanding of how that you sort of manage it, where you've got a nominal budget, but also then the expenses go over that nominal budget, and how does that zero off at the end of the financial year, and you take into account what you have got from the courts from successful cases, to sort of see how has our nominal budget actually worked.
Yes.
I guess is what we need to look back.
Absolutely.
And if we can go back a couple of years and have 2 or 3 years
Mm.
and go and sort of see how that's worked, then we can provide that information to you to sort of say, whether the nominal budget is appropriate.
Mm.
And
Including all
also-
recoveries.
Hmm?
Include all recoveries.
Yeah, because that's your that's part of your picture.
Yep, thank you.
Kia ora, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Oh, you know, look, we've been over the financials as our role, but it really hasn't been where it is. Like, where is this fund held when we're going through the financials and that sort of stuff?
It's in the regulatory
It's
services.
a regulatory service. It's just a regulatory services fund.
Oh, that's what the email will come out with.
Yeah.
It'll say, what's the nominal budget that we allocate
And I
each
just wonder
year?
where it has been.
It's in Colin's team.
Okay. Do you have a metrics that you run through with your team before you take court action?
When you say metrics, we follow the Solicitor General guideline for prosecutions, for example, prosecutions.
Yeah.
We have an enforcement decision group who makes a recommendation on prosecutions. We get it legally vetted. So we do have quite a comprehensive, robust process for making decisions on enforcement action. And there's different levels of enforcement action. And some of lower level of enforcement action is delegated appropriately to staff. And we've got a whole lot of information that's being prepared currently.
Okay, I see Jono's got his hand.
There's been councillors, Chair. There've been a number of questions raised by a number of members around our delegations manual, and a lot of those delegations, Chair, were around our regulatory services, how we undertake prosecutions and all those sorts of things. We're going to come back with a response to all of those questions. In that, we're going to be proposing or putting a proposal on the table for governance of how you can have greater governance oversight of our regulatory services activities. One of them is prosecutions, and what is our policy around prosecutions and guidance for staff, and one of the recommendations will be that is something that is brought back to governance table for governance to review and approve. Whether at the moment in that email it was suggested that it comes back and forms part of the role and function of this committee. So those issues that Jeff our chair is raising is going to be part of a more comprehensive package of how do you have greater governance oversight of our regulatory services roles and functions.
Yes, kia ora, Joe.
I really support that, Jono, because this particular committee's got 3 independents on it. And of all the committees, including our own council, it's probably the most competent committee for such matters to come to. So really support that initiative.
Okay, so that's a follow-up action. And do we have a time frame around when we would hear back on what you've just proposed, Jono?
Can I say that we circulate that out to members early next week? Is that all right from a time frame for members?
Sorry, can I declare conflict now that you've raised it? I'm on the review of the Solicitor General's prosecution guidelines. So now that's come up. So thank you very much for raising it so that I can declare conflict on it.
Kia ora, and we will have that conflict declared and recorded in the minutes.
So, Chair,
Kia ora.
that's potential conflict. I don't see it as
It's a benefit, but I'm just saying I'm declaring conflict.
No, absolutely. And as such, we will manage that conflict accordingly.
Right.
Any further conversation on the matter?
I've got one little question regarding the chart, just for Bruce, I guess, about your NRC seeking payment of outstanding marine biosecurity fees. That's to a single individual, not to a class or a number of it.
So essentially, there's a group.
Right, it's a group.
of individuals.
Yeah.
And this is essentially being seen as the test case. And if we get a favourable decision, then slight earnings on the funds, which are not outstanding fees.
So may I ask how many outstanding?
There's a handful that are on this action. I think it's 4 or 5.
They're all connected via that
I
same.
can't name the
club,
individual. I
Yeah.
can't name the individual.
No, that's fine. You don't have to.
Which item are you, speaking to, just for the benefit?
Bottom of page 43.
Bottom of page 43.
The
Thank you.
NRC seeking payment of
Yep.
outstanding marine biosecurity fees, which I guess we're all concerned about because we don't want that. We want to nip that in the bud pretty quickly. We believe we're very
Be careful how much we say in the public.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
case
So
was
we're
affordable.
mindful that there is an item there at the bottom of page 43 that is of interest, and we can pick that up later.
Okay, I was going to ask another question, but I'll leave it.
The hearing's 15th of May, so.
Okay, any further comment on item 6.3? We've got a couple of follow-up things there, so making sure that we've included our financials in our papers. That's that. That's that P&L paperwork. Also mindful that we want to learn a little bit more about responsibility in terms of some of the items there. And there's also the item that Jono has raised to our attention that he will bring to us in the next week or so. Okay. Can we please have a mover, please, that the report is received? That's moved by Deanne, seconded by Jeff. And I'll just read the recommendation out. That the report litigation schedule half-yearly report July to December 2023 by Bruce Howes, Taumata, Group Manager Corporate Services, and Samuel Van Hout, Corporate Policy Analyst, and dated 16 February 2024 be received. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? That is unanimously in favour for the motion, and the motion is carried. Kia ora tātou. We're now moving to the insurance update. On page 45, we're being asked to receive this report. We'll take it as read, but if there's any further information that the members would like to contribute in terms of discussion regarding this report, please share your whakaaro. Kia ora.
Can I make comments?
Absolutely.
And thanks, Chair. I'm really seeking views from the elected members as to whether they wish to reconsider some of our insurance. And I've listed some items there that we could potentially consider discontinuing and or moving to self-insurance. And I'm really looking for feedback from the members to if there is an appetite for this, or if you want us to go away and do more work or whatever it is, so then we can actually come back to you with a formal recommendation as to any potential changes if there is any appetite for that.
The obvious one is self-insurance of vehicles.
Does anyone have a perspective on that, self-insurance of the vehicles?
So I just think, insurance is not going to get any cheaper. We know that. And so have we had independent advice from insurers that may give us some advice around, what is doable? The self-insurance is an interesting thing. Some of the other ministries in Wellington don't actually have insurance on cars because of the continued, but do we have a budget to do R&M on the vehicles to counteract the issue when we're talking about self-insurance? Again, I can't comment because I haven't seen the financials on that to see whether or not we could give that right advice to you, Bruce.
Thanks, Dan. If I can just respond. I've done an analysis on our claims history there, looking at how much it's cost us in terms of, what it's cost us in terms of our claims and the actual overall costs. And it's we're averaging $53,000 a year in the cost, and we're paying currently, we're paying for it $125. So on that balance, we would have, on an average, we would have a surplus unless there was some, some high risk incident that cost us a lot of money, and then we might not. So I would suggest if we were looking to move into this, then we could establish an insurance reserve, and that money that you were spending on insurance would go into that reserve, and you'd utilise that to pay for any costs.
To vehicles.
Yeah.
I would support something in relation to that if that's the analysis made by management. But I think there are other areas that you probably could shave in your insurance, which I kind of don't see in here. It's just, again, declared conflict I was a professional advisor for insurance, so just no longer retired from that.
Hilda, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. I think I did my own analysis. Well, it's a no-brainer on NRC, but we're actually looking at self-insuring ourselves. It takes 3 years where you're actually, and you generate your own income from your insurance that would cover everything, more than enough time. We're looking at a positive outcome of what, 80,000 a year. We should probably have a ceiling on that insurance and we self-insure. Once it gets to like 500,000, don't need it, it'll generate its own income and be self-sufficient. I think I did my analysis about 5 years that would happen. So I don't see it's a big risk in our audit and risk meeting. I think it's a real low risk, easy, low hanging fruit one. And I'd like it seen maybe to overview some of our other opportunities. I know buildings are a little bit different. Just burnt down, obviously it'll be major. But what other, are we insuring our tools and equipment? And I'm not sure how far you want to go down, but some stuff we probably shouldn't even worry about insurance. But maybe an overview of what we actually own, what needs to be insured and not. And maybe that could actually encompass a lot of those low-hanging insurance problems with our car insurance savings once we get that to 500,000. That actually oversee, excluding buildings and property.
Joe, you've got a comment?
Yeah, I think really support what Jeff said. I think I'd like to give an indication that public liability, maritime risk is something that we just wouldn't even go near. Yeah, because of the potential of something catastrophic there. Yeah. So, we need to sort of, that's out
Major assets.
there, there's a continuum. And I wouldn't even drag the continuum too far towards the centre.
Yeah, and
Yeah, most certainly.
and I did go through and do that analysis, Chair.
Yeah, there's a sheet there. Yeah.
The PI and the PL I wouldn't touch.
Yeah.
I just think that's too high, we're too exposed.
Sorry, which page are you on? 48?
Sure.
48. Yeah.
Okay.
The ones that I was recommending that we discontinue was crime. So it costs us $10,000 a year. We've got good controls in place and our cover is only up to $1 million. We've got a big balance sheet.
Yeah.
So, the personal accident, I don't see the need for us to be doing that. Employees can obtain their own insurance for that purpose, unless you want to keep that. It's a freebie. It's not a necessity. And employers' liability as well. I think the risk of ACC not providing cover is so low that we'll be spending $800 a year on it. It's just not value for money in my opinion. They were the three that I singled out that we could do away with. And we have looked at our options around excesses, but typically they don't stack up.
Yeah,
in my workshops with Aon, it's not something that stacks up in their favour. It sort of favours the insurer. We pay a higher premium. So I think we're right where we are with our excesses currently. And then the opportunity to move to self-insurance for the fleet if there's an appetite for that. That were the things I identified.
Would you like to reply, Joe?
Yeah, there's one element. When you get package insurance, you pull out those bits, because the insurer is also mindful that he's got less risk in certain areas. You could find other stuff that up with it too. Just, I've done that with my insurance, and I pull that and that out, and I just find I don't get much of a discount.
Okay. And Jack, you have
just a couple of minor points of explanation. Really. Thank you. Firstly, thank you. Great report. I like what you've done. I agree that. First of all, do we have comprehensive insurance with one company only, or we got our stuff spread out over?
So we're working in with several other local authorities, and then Aon goes away and brokers our insurance for us off the back of them. So we're pooling, so we get a greater value for money.
The reason I was asking is because if we start peeling off some of the insurances, is that going to reflect on higher premiums for the other ingredients? But the way you put it, it's probably a minimal risk.
Our insurance is quite small in comparison to the TAs we're bundled in with, because they have a lot more infrastructure and insurance with that as well. So there may be some impact. I'd have to go back and just ask Aon.
But I think the way it's structured, I think that question kind of answers itself. Just one little question about the personal accident. Now, what exactly does that cover? I think I understand, but I need a if you could just qualify it a bit. Personal accident, the 12,700 odd premium. So that's for,
So if somebody had an accident and they were employed by us, then we could pay out essentially to support them. If, you know, an accidental death or injury.
while at work.
Yes. I don't know if,
So what's our ACC? How does that affect ACC? And how does it affect the employees' rights?
my point is ACC already covers people. So why
No.
would we be doing this?
Not for the first 7 days, I don't. And then the only the percentage is 80% of the thing. So what we're saying is that we're shaving off an employee right. So we're bringing it to this table to look at our employees' things. I don't know if there's, I don't know what work's been done with employees, sorry, Bruce, around the consideration around that before we shave numbers.
Can we just have a look at that and also have a look at whether we've got it already in our contracts with our staff that we.
Thank you.
Benefit that we provide or a cover that we provide.
And what our responsibilities are as an employer in that respect. Is that what you're raising to our attention?
Yeah, because it'll be a risk if, you know, if we have them in our agreements and then we go to say today, we recommend to the councillors to cut the insurance and then our staff are not well informed, then we have mitigations through legal for changing the employment agreements. Is that correct?
Well, it would have been without consultation with those affected people. So if we can get some, you know, information about that, that'll help us in making a decision. One other item I think that's important for our attention is that the third party liability is considered the greatest risk exposure. And that's raised in the report as well. And with the potential for liability to greatly exceed the total annual premium cost. And I'm just wondering if there's sort of an idea around the likelihood of that happening, because that'll be helpful for us to make a call, not only as an employer, but also as people that may need to respond from claims from others. And we don't know what that liability could look like, but I'm sure that you guys have given it some thought, and yeah, just wanted to raise that.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to understand the likelihood, but the consequence is potentially very severe. You know, so if we crash a car into something that's worth a couple of $1 million and we write that off, then we're liable for that. And then if we injure another party and they take us to court, we end up having to pay, I don't know, whatever it is, liability wise to that individual, then we're also quite exposed. So that's the risk of self-insurance.
Kia ora, Jack.
I've just got one little question regarding 2 items here about the level of coverage. Infrastructure, 28 and a bit million, flood protection, natural landslide, slip, tsunami, tornado, windstorm. That sounds like very little. Is that in addition to other measures, or?
Sorry, Jack, where are you looking?
It's on page, the last page of the chart.
49,
The
infrastructure,
Yeah.
insurance, the infrastructure insurance policy, is that the one that you're referring
Yeah.
to?
infrastructure,
That's
flood
to do with
protection,
Alanui Kai or Whangarei Urban.
28 and a bit million. Doesn't seem like a lot of cover.
No, sorry, the cover is 45. That's the value of the asset.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it's to ensure like the physical assets.
Okay, and the next, well, that still seems low.
So there's 2 years there, Bruce. So both years, you know, have like a cover and a dollar figure sign there. One's 2022 to 2023, and the next one is 2023 to 2024. Is that what you're referring to, Jack?
Yeah. Well, so even at 45, well, it looks like this year it's going to be, okay,
So
it's
that-
hard to read, it's pretty small, 45 million.
We do value the assets, and the insurance is based on the value of the assets.
And the other one, same question, and cyber attack or data breach, $2 million, $2 million. Gee, you only insure for $2 million with a cyber attack. What happens, apart from data theft, what happens if we get system crash? Is $2 million enough?
The insurers have advised us that there may be, in the coming year or years, no cover for cyber because of the risk. So we're considered extremely fortunate at the moment to have that amount of cover for a cyber event.
Wow, talk about high risk for the organisation. Yeah.
But in the event that that was to happen, organisations of our nature generally have a disaster recovery plan, and all our data will not be stored in one place. So our data should be in at least 3 different places. So we would have other repositories where our curated and catalogued data, of which will be many, many years of recordings and archival information, it would be in those 3 other places, which I'm not aware are. I'm not sure if we're entirely over the disaster recovery plan, but the disaster recovery plan would speak to what Jack is raising to our attention.
Correct, except for if somebody was trying to ransom us, I guess, then this would kick in and cover for that potentially,
But if we were to have a situation where we were at ground zero in terms of our data, we know that we have a responsibility to actually have that data stored in other places, because that data doesn't just belong to us. It belongs to the people that we serve.
Great response, but is that the case? Are we there?
understand
Yeah.
our data is stored in AWS in Sydney and also in North Cloud locally as well.
So just to clarify, quantify this, cyber insurance is primarily towards hacking. It's not necessarily towards anything else. And I haven't seen your policy, so I can't make a comment on your policy, but primarily it focuses on ransom. No, not recovery necessarily, ransom of data. Is that right, Jono? Is that what's in your guys' policy?
Yeah.
It's paying the ransom for the recovery of that data and the non-misuse of data. Is that
I can read out the narration if you like.
Yeah.
So the narration provides cover in the event that council is a victim of a data breach.
Yes.
Covers the financial consequences of a lost or stolen employee or customer data, including damages claims and loss of profit, whilst also recovering the cost of restoring or recollecting data following breach.
So
Okay, I'm confident, I'm fine with that. So what about a cyber crash that affects our process, our ability to actually use computers rather than the data that's held within them? I'm sorry, I'm pretty ignorant, but I'm just trying to cover all the bases.
Can I just make a comment? And in that respect, sometimes people or businesses in our circumstances might have a business continuity plan that sits alongside the disaster recovery plan that is kind of like worst case scenario if we ended up with a situation where we were held ransom and we needed to get our things back. We know that we've got other copies, and Bruce has brought that to our attention that we have 2 other locations as well. And we have our own internal servers as well.
Talking about ability to actually do, but not the data side of it, but the actual processing side. That has happened. When I worked for the Victorian government, we used to have the system which used to crash at least once a week. And it was because people are allowed to bring in floppy disks and stuff like that. And problems. And sometimes the system would go down for 2 or 3 days at a time. And it really cost the whole government system in Victoria millions.
I think there's a different thing though. I think that's maintenance, that's R&M budgets. That's not necessary. And that's where you have your technology budgets and things like that. That this insurance is primarily for a major event. And I hear your systems down. Systems still happen down today, you know. And so that would be in Jono and Bruce's remit of what their IT technology. I don't even know who you are, who you have, but what that would be in that space. So that would be in a regulatory budget of operations.
So you're not insuring for that?
No, not for operations. I wouldn't assume so.
True. Correct. Okay, no more questions.
Now that we've I think we've talked this one quite a lot, and we are going to be speaking little bit more about the sort of stuff in the deep dive report later on. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora, Chair. I just wonder if, and I haven't, I must say, I haven't laid eyes on our business continuity plan for this for a while. Bruce, can you just give us an update, and maybe it's something we want to bring back to this committee, what our business continuity plan is in that event? And like we've had a bit of a deep dive into this corridor now. I know it's a little bit of an ad hoc approach, but it is worth making sure that we're all across it and know what our business continuity plan is in that situation.
I think that'd be a very good idea.
Well, so we can have that as an agenda item for our next Audit and Risk and Finance
Good
Committee
idea.
meeting.
I just noted now internal audit page 37, it's currently on hold and due to restart early 2024. So we've got to get on.
Let it go, Bruce.
Well, at least we're on to it, you know. It's already on there.
Well, Kapai, we'll listen and we'll hear from Jeff and then we'll round
Just
up.
remind,
this
like
comment.
another action for me being on audit and risk, we're going through our insurance thing, and Bruce has highlighted the vehicle one's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But I'd like actually, a 10-year breakdown on some of these things. We've spent X amount of million for 10 years. Our actual claim or whatever, our risk profile is actually this because we've never drawn on it, blah, blah, blah. I'd like to see that info so that we've got, when we look at these, we can actually make, well, shit, it's 125,000 a year. 10 years we've claimed zero. What is the risk to us if we take that out, put it into the fund? I think that's what we're here for, is to make those defined decisions.
So just to clarify, Jeff, so a 10-year schedule
Well, I think it needs to be deep enough that we can see a trend.
of all these insurances,
Well, there's some here that we won't give up.
because I'm happy to go back to Aon and say, give us a report.
Yep.
What have we spent?
Yes.
What have we claimed against everything?
Yeah.
And then what's their view on risk as well, right?
Yeah.
And then I can bring that back to another.
Yeah, the next audit and risk
Yep.
meeting.
And then after you've had that information, we can make a decision on whether you want
Because I think everyone's got an opinion, but it'd be good to see data.
Yeah.
to. Cool.
Just one amendment to that. Could we also have, because one of the recommendations here is on the crime one, any litigations that we've had outside of the insurance policy that would cause us to say we need that insurance for the crime one, because it's primarily from the wording here around fraud, taking people to court on fraud and things like that. So can we sort of add to that? So there's the insurance 10-year, but anything else we've spent in the last 10 years on that allows us that view to say, oh, we're saving $10,000 a year. Like our councillor, the car one's a no-brainer because we can see that, but the other three I've just questioned.
Okay, cool. Okay, George, and then we'll come to Steve. Kia ora, George.
Okay, so that's going up the scale. Just a couple of things. One for Councillor Crawford. Perhaps when you're talking about system crashes, that was around technology warranties. Certainly when people were bringing in floppy disks in previous times and systems went down, we have similar with people using unregulated IT addresses and unregulated or unauthorized use of devices outside of the office space. They're susceptible to viruses. Our biggest IT problem in the Kaitaia at the moment is service provision. So we've actually got really good warranty from technology from your basic or your normal, your off-the-shelf even computers. So there's that one. Second, in terms of what Jeff was just talking about, should know the chair's surname, shouldn't I? But never mind.
That's all right.
In terms of that long claim history. So what many of the iwi are going through is a process to change the risk profile and get it acknowledged. So many of us pay an arm and a leg for Marai-based insurance, when across a whole iwi you'll have no fires on any Marais for 10 or 15 years.
Only in Kaikoura, but that's okay.
Yeah, and even that one, just outside the 15 years, if you don't mind. Okay. But that's how rare they are, but you still get the same charge. So what they're doing is trying to shift their risk profile, retaining insurance cover for big items, and then internally covering the smaller items. And then that gives us a premium saving of a significant amount, 30–40%, accumulate that over a number of years, and then go to a managed sovereign fund situation for internal insurance programs, which I think is what where you're heading in your line of
So we'll just come to Steve and then we're going to come over to Joe.
Just a quick question. It was just in relation to the claims history. So that will include what's been paid out on third party, where a third party is also claimed against.
Correct. I'll ask Aon for everything they've got going back as far as they can provide.
Yeah, I just listening to George and because he's talking about a 10-year period of building up. We could probably shortcut that by actually, if we decide as a council to actually put some reserve, introduce into the reserve some funds so that we've got some income from interest and stuff like that. We could actually get this thing going a bit faster, you know, if we want to head down that road. But I think we would need to know that we've got adequate reserves in there to be able to do this.
Look, any further comments before we move on to the next item? Just taking on all those suggestions. And there's an indication from the meeting that there's interest in exploring ways to reconfigure what our insurance policy includes and doesn't include. Through the CEO, we're going to learn more about the business recovery plan, the disaster recovery plan, and of course that cyber item in the insurance as well. Also the fraud that might be associated with the crime was something that came up. Can I please have a mover, please, for the report?
Cheers.
Moved by Joe and seconded by Jeff. I will read that out. This is the insurance update. That the report insurance update by Bruce Howes, Paumaka, Group Manager Corporate Services, and dated 16 February 2024 be received. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Ka hore he whakahetanga kua tau te rā mō tini. That motion is carried. We will now move on to risk management activity update, which is item 6.5 on page 50 of the papers. And we'll be hearing from Mandy Tepania. Tēnā koe, Mandy.
Kia ora. I'm hoping the top now is a bit more self-explanatory. We went through that with the group managers and I'm hoping that explains it a lot better. We had one change to make. This has been a bit of activity on there. On my 53, it's the operational side. The risk 14264 has been increased. It's now 10. Louisa is here if you have any questions about that for the flood infrastructure failure. That's the only change that's actually been made to this report since it was produced earlier this month.
We have a comment from the CEO. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair, thank you. Just interested as to why the risk has been increased from 5 to 10 for the flood infrastructure failure.
Page number? Are you talking to 53? Page 53?
Page 53. I assume, Mandy, that's what you're referring to.
Yes, it is.
Yep. Just interested to understand what the increase in the residual risk is.
Kia ora.
So when we took this report to ELT, this looked unusually low as a residual risk. So we went back and reviewed with the team and actually reviewed the frequency of the potential risk and moved it from rare to possible because that's actually much more realistic. So that's why it's moved. The residual risk has then come up to 10 rather than 5. I have just as an addition, I literally yesterday updated this again to the trend is actually up. I believe the trend of this is up at the moment. We're moving up in terms of risk. And that's around the fact I'm finding it really challenging to recruit our asset management officer. We're about to go out for our 3rd round of recruitment. We've made some adjustments to our job description and we've put some feelers out. We're trying to do some really targeted recruitment. But that role is absolutely key to managing this whole risk. So that's why I see it at the moment. It's increasing. If we can get that person in place, get them up to speed quickly, then I'll feel a lot more comfortable around it.
Kia ora. Any further comments, Jeff?
Yeah, just with Louis about the flood infrastructure. So now it's come into extreme. And there is, John, I will tell you that there is court proceedings on some of these issues around the country. Should be, I would have thought, I'm surprised by the extreme rating, and you've explained why. But I would have questioned the extremeness of our flood infrastructure. Is it rated against flooding town or just breaking?
So it actually comes in under possible, brings it to high, not extreme,
Okay,
under
High,
the risk matrix.
it's gone up to 20, so
It's
that's
doing it.
inherent rating.
20. 20 is the
Second.
inherent risk. The residual risk is 10.
Okay. And just the other one, quite interesting, that's top of my list at the moment, is Niagara. What information do you have on that internally?
So I think at the not the last audit run, the last audit and risk committee meeting, we had Jim Lau, the harbour master, came in and gave quite an in-depth brief on the Niagara wreck, and I can certainly provide that paperwork back to you again. Basically, he doesn't see it. The reason I've taken it off here as a risk, or I haven't taken it off, it's included in the oil spill because the risk is an oil spill risk.
Yep.
And we have good controls in place to manage an oil spill, and that's through a regulatory system of how you actually, the national standards and around how you actually manage oil spills. So we've got the right number of people qualified, we've got some, we regularly run exercises on oil spill response. So for us, that's why then I combined it into the oil spill.
Okay. At
the moment, one of the main points that Jim brought out last time, the Audit Risk Committee, was that it's not, I know we would be impacted by a spill from that wreck, but it's actually a risk that's being actively managed by Maritime New Zealand. It lies in the Auckland area, so it's not actually within NRC's area jurisdiction, but of course we are an interested party because our coastlines would be impacted if there was a spill. At the moment, one of the biggest challenges with managing that is actually getting an inspection of the wreck. So it's down deep, so you can't send divers down to do it. You have to have a remotely operated vehicle. And my understanding was at the last, when Jim reported back to us, that Maritime New Zealand were going to talk to the New Zealand Defence Force because the Navy has a remotely operated vehicle that can go down to those depths to see if there is actually any oil leaking. But until we actually know what the state of the wreck is and whether there's oil leaking, you can't really make plans to, well, I mean, obviously you have your oil response plans to go, but in terms of addressing the actual wreck itself, really you need to know what's going on first before you can make plans to do that.
Oh, that's good. Can you send me all that information? Because we're actually going to the Maritime Minister with that concern, which is good to see it's on our.
Yeah, so we've included it in oil spill because the risk is oil spill. It's not, the wreck is not risk. If you see what I mean.
That's what we see it as well.
Yeah. Okay, I can.
Comment from Joe, and then we'll go to Jono. Kia ora, Joe.
Yeah. The flood infrastructure failure. I think we could do some work on that one. Awanui especially, and because our new stuff we've built, it's been engineered, it's been engineered, and I think our main risks is in the infrastructure that we inherited mainly through Kaitaia. And I just wonder whether we should have a CPT program going on the banks of the areas that we have an intuition, where our technical staff have got an intuition and got a high risk in, because it's really cheap, and we have an immediate empirical value on its structural strength. That gear is really good gear.
Did you want a response from anybody, Joe, or are you sharing perspective?
I think, I'm sharing a perspective. I think we should note that one, and Bruce can speak to his engineers about it. Yes.
Through you, Louisa.
Sure, Chair. So I have discussed this risk with the team, particularly Peter Weissing up in Awanui and Joe Camuso. yes, they are aware that that the inherited infrastructure that we have, particularly up around Kaitaia, is probably our area of highest risk. And their gut feel is that these stock banks and those inherited places have infrastructure have lasted for a number of years. Yes, they need to be maintained. If you went to a geotechnical expert, they would probably fail them because they're not.
They haven't been engineered.
Yes, yeah, because they haven't been engineered effectively.
But that CPT testing, that's just driving a probe.
So this is why my point around I need that asset management officer to be able to plan ahead, budget for maintenance, budget for those sort of, plan for those sort of programs. At the moment, I don't have that capability, but I'll certainly take it on board.
Yeah, just mentioned it.
Kia ora, Jono.
Kia ora, Chair, thank you. I'm just coming on the back of Joe's comments also just around the flood infrastructure failure. Louisa, have you, when we've got flood infrastructure failure here, just clarifying, is this also got the EDGCM risk rolled into the same one?
Yeah, no, I reviewed the risk as requested, and you'll see that the risk wording has subtly changed to, I'm just trying to get to it, hang on. So the NRC Council infrastructure fails with flooding causing loss of human life or human health and welfare, the loss of key community wellbeing infrastructure, hospitals or schools, for example, the loss of significant lifelines or network infrastructure, and the social disruption caused by displacing people out of flood-damaged dwellings for long periods of time that may result in unlimited liability or action being brought against NRC. And we added a new control around liability insurance. And you've just been talking about the insurance, and the liability insurance in there is for 145 million. I checked in the soil conservation. What am I saying? Soil Conservation Act and the Rivers Act around what our obligations were. And it states in section 148, if the owner or occupier of any land or property gives notice in writing to any board warning that any dam, sluice or reservoir may be maintained by the board is weak and requiring it to strengthen or repair the same, and the board within a reasonable time after the delivery of the notice fails to take proper and reasonable precautions sufficiently to strengthen or repair the dam, sluice or reservoir, then the amount of any damages sustained through that failure shall be made good by the board. So that's the key thing for us. So we've also, one of the other controls we have that we've initiated to make sure we have a more robust customer inquiries process, making sure that these sort of things are followed up, don't fall through the gaps, specifically within that natural hazards and flood inquiries team.
Kia ora.
Chair, I just wonder if you might want to consider having an action on the Audit Risk Finance Committee that staff keep the committee updated on the EDGCM case. So the EDGCM case is basically a civil case against the council there, where the impact on those private property owners that they've been taken through the court. It's not just an issue for them, it's an issue for the regional sector, and it's something for us to really be aware of as to whether we're doing our job right and what our obligation, whether we've got sufficient cover should an event like that occur. I think it's just something that we don't want to fall off the bench.
Jono, we're doing that at the moment in paper 6.1, which we've already covered. We have covered it. Yeah, it is referenced in on page 19 of the papers, the EDGCM situation, and the staff do get across that sort of stuff and keeping us aware of it. But things are just sort of like at a pace at the moment that we are learning more about.
Sorry, through the chair, page 54.
Yes.
There are two items that sit on the bottom of that table. I'll address the bottom item, which is increased aggressive people and psychological harm with the staff. It's great to note that that's been noted concern for risk for this committee is how often are we mitigating that and what's actually happening. Seems as though it's been highlighted as an increased risk to us.
More recently, it's been cause and effect in some environments. So yeah, cause and effect is one of them that I've observed. Maybe the staff have something to share on that.
We.
Back.
Okay.
Would like to dive back.
Okay, then, yep, we'll just go that one and then we'll come back to Joe.
We do provide staff with training, can actually deal with individuals who are being aggressive. We actually come out together a draft policy with regards to harmful communications as well. This in which people need to follow to actually, for us to try and do something about it, to support them. We also provide counselling.
I suppose my question is not the program of support, is the broader, Jono, Bruce, what is the broader approach to this being an increased behaviour? Because it's not gonna, I don't think it'll slow down in the current way in which people are behaving at the moment, you know, post-COVID, now going into an economic decline, flooding, you know, all of these different environmental impacts that are impacting people, is what's the bigger approach to this in terms of, and if we use, again, case in point, Ministry of Social Development's, the death of a staff member down in Invercargill, as a platform of where risk could go to. What is our bigger approach to that? Because that's my concern about the staff. It's not just training them on how to deal with it, is what is the risks that we hold, councillors hold, you, Jono, you, Bruce, hold, and what are we doing from a bigger, broader approach? So maybe a marketing campaign to the clientele that are being aggressive. I don't know, I'm just saying.
Can I ask you a question, Dan? Are you speaking to duty of care?
Yes,
yes. And our duty of care as an employer?
Yes.
Okay, because I think that's an important point for us to consider.
Yeah, it is. It's a major issue because behaviours are not changing and people are getting more aggressive.
Okay. We'll note that. And Joe, you would like to revisit something?
Yeah, just dive back. I was going to follow up with what Lisa said about the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act and those responsibilities that actually sound quite beyond what the name of the act is. And there's an issue that George over there be well aware of in Kaitaia. It's called the Kauri Dam, and it's been thrown from pillar to post, and it's a dam that's got a slump in it, and it's volume of water. It's got a little place called Kaitaia that sits down below it a bit, and I'm just flagging it. You've got a bit of an issue there that we need to put a lens across.
Okay, well, our staff are making notes of that.
That was a pretty superficial comment I made there, but George, you might touch on it. It's pretty political, isn't it?
Well, it is. If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I was going to say a couple of things around the whole flooding infrastructure because, and I'm not aware of the technicalities of the CPT testing that Councillor Carr referred to in terms of stop banks. But my primary comment would be that the mitigations undertaken in the last couple of years around flood mitigation, Awatere River in and around Kaitaia have been fantastic. I don't think I would be in this position. We'd be more like Dargaville last year if we didn't have that extended capacity by the widening of the banks. So that led me to think, what was the failure in Dargaville and what's the liability there? Was it just sheer volume or was there an actual breach of the walls? I don't know. And then what's our liability in respect, some of the stuff that Louise has itemised, was the economic impacts that occur in the Hikurangi swamp area year in, year out. Because that seems to me a place where the stop banks seem to flood and breach on a regular basis. I know its natural geography is that it's the shape of a saucer. Water can't get all over the place, but come back to your one around the Kauri Dam, yes. Another one that's in there, of course, is the cyanobacteria, which seems to be almost resident over there. So good to have a broad view, but I think we can also need to drill down in a couple of areas in terms of those risk managements.
Just before we move on to Jack, I'm keen to understand how our risk management activity, well, on the schedule here, we've got these numbers and, they give us a rating. How does that impact on the report that we just received earlier, which is the insurance update, and the way that we consider the amount of puta or the value of those insurance policies? Is there a relationship between these two reports? For example, the extreme ratings, the high ratings, the moderate ratings. Is there some sort of relationship in the process of decision making around insurance?
I'd like to make the initial response to that because it's strange. First meeting of the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee. Someone had a good idea to bring two separate bodies together, and with insurance, you've got the ideal or the most desired or the most required confluence of both those two committees. Risk and what's impact on finances, risk and how to pay for mitigating that risk. So I think there is, your question is quite correct. But if we looked at some of the stuff, and I think yesterday's talk around Mount Taika was similar. What's the value proposition if you looked at that commercially? And you can assess it on one side, but there's also an ecological value that doesn't equate quite so easily. And same with Kalupa. There may be less cost to us on one aspect of it in terms of economic activity, but there's a huge cost that's not easily monetized in terms of biodiversity. And so, you've got the sort of tension between the two aspects of regional council, economics and environmental concerns in a microcosm and in a real intense view. So,
Kia ora. Bruce, do you have any comment on that?
To your original question, Chair, I think they are linked because we are obtaining the highest value liability cover we can, which is 145 million. That's a national layer. We can't get anything higher.
Yeah.
So we do try and link to a maximum exposure and cover ourselves as much as possible.
Okay, Kapai. Sorry, there was a comment from Jack.
It's a question, really. And it sort of leads on from your own question, Peter Lucas, and that's about the methodology that we use to determine risk. I've been involved with risk assessment in another life a lot. I love doing it because you've got absolutely have to do it. But I've always felt that the matrix system has severe limitations. It's such a blunt tool. Just you have the likely impact versus the likely prevalence. And then you only ascribe a certain number, 4 or 5 values to each, or 3 or 4 values to each. So you come up with some fairly blunt figures. Now, I guess my question is, have we looked at any other methodologies, for instance, like what the insurance industry must use? Because they would use algorithms and a whole lot of graduated kind of graph-based approaches. Secondly, are we coordinating our efforts or figuring out what other regional councils are doing? Because the more data you collect, the better, more accurate you'll get. So that's my second question. Are we collaborating, or at least information-wise, with other regional councils? And also the third question is, when we apportion those values, are they basically a best guess? They always pretty well used to be in my time, best guess by staff. Or was there some sort of scientific data you can plug in? I know that can be a bit pedantic sort of questions, but best methodology, Peter.
Okay, yeah. If you'd like to respond.
It is qualitative. It is an industry-wide used practice in terms of the likelihoods and consequences to determine risk, and it is the most commonly used methodology we've got. I'm not sure if we can get into the detailed use of logarithms. We are working through the SIG collaboratively, so the river SIG, it does a lot of work collaboratively looking at risk.
Good.
how to address that. So we do have the corporate services thing, which we discuss our insurances and what we're doing to try and minimize cost and exposure. I think for me, whilst we use a scheme to rank things, it's like, what are we actually doing about the risk?
Yeah,
That's the big thing for
it's just a guide.
yeah. So, and like that discussion around the Kaitaia scheme was really good because we got some practical kind of things that we could look at potentially to reduce or mitigate that risk. So that's the kind of thing for me. It's like, how do we address these risks?
Sorry, through the chair, can I
yeah,
just
sure.
address one
Thank
other
you, Dean.
question? Page 59.
Page 59.
Our top 10 risks, I note number 4 and number 5 obviously work hand in hand. Again, discussion. I would like to see in our reports, so the comment and a question to the management, how we're operating on SIPO so that we can understand the mitigation to number 4, because number 4 identifies that there is a risk to our portfolio financially, and that's to do with primarily, I think, I'm reading it, to dividends and distributions, and also returning on our investments. And so I think if we're naming a risk and it's in our, top 5, top 10, that in order for us to give good advice, we need the right information in front of us. So how we're projecting on SIPO and our investments. We had the Ericsson Global report that we need here before, so that we can assist the management team with what our recommendations would be.
Can we get that Ericsson report out to the members of the committee? It was referred to by Jonathan yesterday. He said he's seen
we
it.
can circulate that. That's fine. And Dan, my apologies too. I should have provided you some of that information before these meetings because some of the other members have already received that. You haven't. So
No.
I'll undertake to provide you some of that information
That'll be great.
in addition to that. So you've got all that financial background.
Because one of my key concerns is related to point 5 of that with the economic downturn, and we've seen that slide in the past 6-7 months, is that we're at the top of the hill on our investments at the moment, according to the verbal report from Ericsson Global yesterday, and it's on the decline. So what is our fund management approach? We need to be feeding back to whoever's doing our fund management. Are we pulling out of fund management because it's a risk, because it's going to go down on a slope? It's on its 7-year cycle slope. And is it better invested sitting in the bank where we're returning better interest rates in the bank? And do we change our SIPO so that we can reflect the change in the economic environment? So the reason why through the chair, I think we need to really look at that when we're looking at giving feedback on risks.
And on that note, can we just have a comment from Bruce on the review of the SIPO?
Yes, Chair.
The process, because that kind of is very related to the comment that Deanne's made.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, last year we had a substantial review of the SIPO undertaken independently and peer reviewed and signed off by what at that stage was the investment property subcommittee, and then endorsed or approved by council. And typically we do have Jonathan Ericsson coming to these meetings, and there is the financial report. It's just yesterday we received the financial report, so we didn't have it on the agenda for this meeting. So we will have that for our next meeting. We will have Jonathan in attendance, and we will discuss those very things that you described here.
So my secondary question to that, through the chair, my apologies to harping on to this, is has the council or councillors or the management done a review on who manages our fund management? When was the last time we reviewed that? Because I know Jonathan, it's been around a long time, Jonathan, long time, but there are other fund management groups that we could potentially look at moving forward. Just a question.
Do we have a review?
We undertook a review last year. We re-tendered the services. Ericsson's Global was awarded the contract for further 12 months. We'll undertake a review when that contract is up for renewal. And also we're having some other discussions around our overall financial portfolio, which will fold into that potential management of that. So it's quite a big, broad, wide discussion.
Okay, kia ora. Joe?
Yeah, and I'm repeating George's comments about investment property coming into this audit risk. Much of council's property, virtually all of it, has been inherited from Northern Harbour. It's reclaimed land, it's very low lying, and it's as far as hazard, it's extremely high risk. And I really think we can give enough confidence to that, because that's an asset that the whole of Northland is very important to this whole council. And, my time, I used to be on that committee. We actually, but I did. I every opportunity to unload low-lying land, I supported. And I just wonder, because it's quite a tricky one. It's, if the council doesn't march out of its investments, it's also sending a signal to the community too. So it's you know, but I think we've just got a huge exposure asset-wise there.
Okay, Bruce, would you like to make a comment?
And I do, and that's a really good point you make, Councillor Clark. I do wonder whether we have too much concentration on property, particularly concentration within one area. And then we have a look through our overall portfolio. We've probably got investments in different land holdings within our different equities and private equities. And that's something that we need to look at and consider whether or not that balance is right. So that's something that we'll be bringing to council, and we'll in fact have a discussion next week on that. We've got a workshop on an item where we'll be coming with an independent person to talk to you about those exact things.
And yeah, you've probably got some good thoughts on that one too. Yeah.
Any further comments on this? Kia ora, George.
Just on page 59 in general, the number one, strange that two things, maintaining a majority shareholding, is that an actual failure to maintain a majority shareholding, is that an actual risk? And secondly, with a majority shareholding, I would have thought that translates to a majority of board decision prowess as well too.
Comment from the staff?
If there was a large capital raising and we weren't able to invest to keep up with our share, then we would become potentially diluted.
But is that a risk? Because if there's an investment, you'd think that would pick up our shareholding, our capital value, probably have a greater return on existing capital invested. It could be viewed in the other.
I think it's about our ability to raise capital to invest to keep up with our share of what that equity requirement would be.
Is there, oh, there's an equity requirement.
Yeah, potentially. So.
Okay, that's different then. Thank you.
Kia ora, Jeff.
Like, just talking on 59, same thing. I'm just George saying, is there any political risk? Are there any investments like political change of direction? Obviously, looking at sport at the moment. Is that considered maybe in a risk thing? You know, we're seeing updated, you know, announcements. Does that move into a risk portfolio? Do we follow that? You know, like, are we agile enough in some of our risk profiles to pick up communication from government and add it into our risk profile? Because our risk might drop if they bring in a criteria. Is that anything that we look at? It's an overview.
Just to add to that, so prime example, Fast Track. Fast Track is going to financially disable this regional council and also the district councils if some of the Fast Track legislation comes in.
I don't know.
Potential risk on income.
Consideration by staff. We've never considered a political interference, what it would do to our business.
I certainly do think it does have a potentially significant bearing on what we do, what the government of the day intends to do or not do, and that change could be quite significant for us. So,
could lower the risk or rise it.
Jono, would you like to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. So Bruce, can we just, I'm just taking some notes myself, but can we just note down, I think it's a valid thing of how do we make sure that we keep our risk assessment and risk profiling up to date with the current political environment and political direction. And I guess that then goes to the people that are making the assessment. Have they got that front of mind when they're making those assessments and providing advice back to this committee?
As a leadership team as well.
Correct. So we can, I think that's something that we need to just make sure that we are bringing that lens actively to our assessments and feedback to this committee. I totally agree.
Yesterday, we received a report as part of our council meeting that was item 8.4 on the council agenda, and that was about legislative compliance. In so much as treaty settlements are concerned in our paper, that's on page 67, that's identified as a risk. But I note there that the explanation is more about take-on costs. I just want to explore our understanding of our identifying and recognizing that as a risk in general, and that legislative compliance and our commitment to legislative compliance as councillors and as a council is also a risk. And I think that the hearings on the regional plan and our mission to identify those 5 tribes as interested parties when a certain situation evolved and things went before the environmental court is perhaps something we want to reflect on, so that we avoid those sort of circumstances when we think about legislative compliance and treaty settlements and the risk associated with breaching settlements.
I suggest, Chair, that that's a totally different risk to what's on there, which is what you're saying, and that's a risk order in itself that's worth including on our risk register. And just I've picked up on your commentary from yesterday's council meeting. I've got to catch up with Ruben and Oriel just to make sure I better understand what the situation is. And my intention was then to double check with you following that, just so we understand what happened in that situation.
It is about legislative compliance.
Agreed.
And it's also about our understanding of, the RMA. And it's also our understanding of what's happening moving forward, of course, and we've spoken about that briefly. But in the meantime, we have legislative compliance that we need to uphold where treaty settlement acts are concerned, and just keeping in mind, I think that shouldn't be owned by one person. That should be owned by every general manager.
So can we just register that, and I'm happy to sit down with whoever's going to be the owner for it, just to make sure we articulate that.
I think it needs to be owned by every general manager.
Right.
We'll note that as an action.
Because it's about legislative compliance and areas of interest. Kia ora, Steve.
Through you, Chair, and it's actually looking at 8.6, the core IT applications. Has that residual risk been changed given our withdrawal from the IT upgrade that we were looking at earlier in the financial year?
Sorry, which page are you on, Steve?
Oh, it's on, so it's residual on 60 at the top. Because the reasons for the change, the reasons for the change would still be there.
No, good question, but I think we do that security vetting through any system that we put in place. And so whilst we've moved from that new system, we're utilising our existing system in its place. That's going to be upgraded, and we do the security vetting before we do any of that. And same with the Elmo recruitment software. So the team does the security vetting and then make sure that that's all robust before they start implementing it and it meets certain criteria.
So there is an alternatives
that work and that are secure, correct.
Any further comments on this item? If there are no further comments,
Just one through the chair. I think also for CVs, but I think simple dashboard, going back to our earlier item, simple dashboard, who owns it, what's the mitigation? So then we're not having to ask as many questions at an audit risk committee. Would be great.
Okay, kia ora, noted. I put the recommendation to the table and to the members that the report risk management activity update by Mandy Tepania, audit and assurance lead and dated 16 February 2024 be received. Ka whakairihia tērā mō tini ki runga, māwai e tuku, mā George e tuku, māwai e tautoko,
Aye.
mā Joe e tautoko, te hunga e whakai ana ki mai ai, ai, te hunga e whakahe ana ki mai ka. Those against?
Just like to thank the staff, because there's a lot of work to get this up to this agenda state. Cheers.
Absolutely. Those against the motion? No against? Motion carried. Kia ora, and I just want to also reiterate the message from Joe. Thank you for your mahi. Kia ora tātou. I nāia nei, ka huri atu tātou ki te pake e whai ake nei, fraud, corruption and dishonesty risk report. And that is on page 68 in your papers. Moved by Jack, seconded by Jeff. Are there any comments?
I've got one small question, Mr. Chairman. Just our supplier invoice fraud seems to be quite low in the others. Are we confident that we've got really good, robust systems that prevent kind of this thing happening?
That's a great answer.
Because it's a common occurrence in lots of businesses, isn't it? That's the primary way that people extract money from organisations.
Yeah. Look, happy to circulate what we've got in place so that can be of assistance. I can ask the team.
Can I help you? I have been paid through Northern Regional Council and I live very tough. Very tough to get paid. Yeah, and you would be the same. So I'm pretty confident.
It's very robust.
Yeah, very
We'll
robust.
see how tough it is.
Okay. Oh, well, no further questions then.
Thanks for giving us. It's hard. It's pretty tough.
It's a long way, Tang. Unless you're on the payroll.
Because when I was at Auckland Regional Council, at Auckland Council, it wasn't like that. It was quite leaky and there were quite a few incidences of fraud. I mean, we're talking $2 million single invoice fraud. And there was, well, I uncovered 940,000 on my own and resulted in a guy getting 5 years jail. So that sort of thing happened a lot in Auckland and it was relatively easy to do.
Not here.
Okay, fine. Well, we will direct our comments now to the paper. Kia ora.
Yeah, just on the report, thank you very much. And thank you to the management team of your control system. That's the risks in this paper are relatively low in comparative to other organisations of this size. So good job on managing the situation because it does happen in the financial world. But looking at your numbers and the how many, that's pretty low. So congratulations. Just a comment through the chair.
Kia ora. Thank you, Deanne. Kia ora, Joe.
Yeah, no, we raised it, this matter with the Deputy Auditor General the other day. It's our balance sheet, somewhere around our gross, it's around 70 million. But Regional Land Transport Plan for the next 3 years is 2.07 billion. And NRC is charged with the statutory responsibility of running the Regional Transport Committee. It's the statutory committee of this council, and we've got a report on the delivery of the Regional Land Transport Plan, right? So currently, that overarching responsibility comes back onto this council. And I don't know if it's a fiscal responsibility, but the reporting against the Regional Land Transport Plan is basis on how much they've spent. and don't have any handle on procurement policies. And we've got a real problem of that I think is universally accepted, that some disconnects and eroding infrastructure is substandard, and it mightn't be, I don't believe it's just a shortage of cash. So we've got, we're working away on this real problem, and in New Zealand wide, it seems quite universal, and we're seeing direction from Treasury that they actually want a system that actually, and of reporting that reports beyond that, shows we're getting value for money, what the various components of the spend are, what proportion is administration, what's getting out and actually being tangible work on the ground. And so we're in a conversation with the deputy auditor. We just said, hey, it'd be a big help for New Zealand if some work was done in this area. And because Northland has got a number of constraints to us delivering really well, could they help us by looking at Northland and trying to work out a template, audit template, a governance template that would be useful to everybody. So, yeah, that was our discussion. So that would be, they said they'd take that away, but there's two roles there. There's foreign auditors general can't actually, it's not submit on government policy, and that's a Treasury role. And we've got a real disconnect with New Zealand Transport Agency in its current form. It's got allocated responsibilities regarding the National Land Transport Fund, and yet they've also got operational responsibilities, like they're spending that fund, which is a contestable fund, and it's not good. Previously, those were separated roles. So how that affects us? Well, it's a massive spend that the statutory committee has got oversight of, and it's causing me a lot of worry personally. Yeah.
Is there a discussion point you want us to follow up on at the next meeting, or an action out of this that you'd like the meeting to consider, Joe?
Well, the first thing is we've got some wisdom around this table, and I just wondered if any of the points I've raised, there's any thoughts about how we should progress to get to a point like yours? Yeah.
I think that we've all identified, particularly with Brent Irwin's and Mangamuka, that there are serious concerns with our main arterial. And then what you're speaking to as well draws our attention to the condition of the whole network, and that perhaps it's not just finances, it could be attitudinal, or in the area of how we decide on procurement and what our process of procurement is for the region. I'm not sure if that responsibility around procurement in that respect, does it partly sit with our council, or is it a shared responsibility around procurement in that respect?
Not us for the roading part, Joe. It's the procurement part sits with the road control.
Well, we have some influence over that in the conversation, at least. We do have a regional transport committee that is involved in those conversations.
Okay. So procurement, we've actually asked for high level reporting on procurement, and procurement's a really good one because it's really wide, and we need some guidance because this really affects our community, and the statutory committee is the regional council's responsibility. So procurement is in my view, we lack. We need the independent development of future maintenance contracts, and currently they're sitting with the actual engineer to the contract, which is with the council's engineers all lumped up in a room. But they've got a highly reactive contract that needs it's conflict of interest, because the more reactive it is and the more micromanaged it is, the more salary they can pull. You know, so you've got that sort of dynamic there. And previously, my previous experience on the Far North District Council ended in 2004. And back then, the allocated branch of this central government transport process was separated from the operational branch, and they really audited the value for money aspects of government funding, or our funding that's comes from roads and charges and stuff. That's just not happening. And we've got an added conflict is that we've got the NTA, which is Northern Transportation Alliance, which is sort of hasn't got it's not even a real legal entity actually. Yeah, it's not running its own financials. Can't dig into it, but the governance body of that is chaired by the NZTA relationships manager to Northland, and being involved with that operational side and overseeing that is a conflict of interest, because the NZTA should actually be coming in and auditing condition of the roads and value for money and a whole lot of stuff like that. And as you can gather, I'm not a professional, but I find a word a bit of a bugger's muddle. You know, it's there. So we suggested to the Auditor General that or his deputy, that this is an area that really needs some thought across New Zealand. But in Northland, in the meantime, we've got to sort things out. So there's a part of the Transport Act was a review, and that review should be looking at the delivery of services, and it should actually look at the constraints. And the review is called a Section 17A review, and we required that from the Regional Transport Committee, and we expanded it out with the health of our staff. There have another 13 points that we wanted responded on, but we have extreme difficulty to actually get that reported back to us, and is progressing, and there's quite a lot of capture going on. And this is a $2.07 billion matter over 3 years, and it's really high level, and you know, it's got very little governance oversight. Would that be correct?
So well,
We'll just have a comment on this, which was kind of just evolved this conversation, and then we better move back on to the paper at hand. Do you want to make a quick comment, Jono, and then we're going to move on?
Oh, kia ora, just to support Councillor Carr in this kōrero, the report, so there is an independent report being done at the moment, as Councillor Carr refers to, the Section 17A plus report that's due out by the end of this month. Then there's a conversation, Joe, as to, okay, then what do we want to do about this? Because I think there's a lot of alignment across the different councils that what's happening at the moment is not working, with a lot of the points that Councillor Carr's raised, and it'll be a topic for the councils and RTC to thrash about and decide what next steps are.
Okay, so back to the paper at hand. That is the fraud, corruption and dishonesty risk report. We have a mover, Jack, and we have a seconder, Jeff. If there are no further comments, I would just like to mention that on page 70, it's clear there that a recent investigation has highlighted no evidence of fraudulent behaviour, but has identified some areas for improvement. relating to procurement and inventory management, which connects us to the conversation that was raised by Joe. So with that being said,
Can I ask a question through the chair around this? And it's a bit of a response to Councillor Joe around procurement. Do we adopt the procurement requirements that come out of Treasury for this regional council?
Yes, we align with those procurement principles.
And so I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, was the question around accountability to those procurement requirements? Your statement around.
Yeah, well, it goes down mainly. Look, I'm very confident of what happens at regional council because with their public transport responsibilities and our subsidised monies and stuff, I think we're, I think we'll be right. But we have a lot of kōrero, every regional transport committee. My members absolutely frustrated that from their district councils they can't get the level of information, and effectively that discussion should be within their councils, but they bring it to the regional transport committee to make the point that there's a dysfunction, and procurement's an obvious one, and there's been there's been instances where they're quite concerned that. Because I think they've got caps to their procurement where it's got to be referred back to governance, that's the council. If they've succeeded and they've seen contracts sort of split apart a bit and that process manipulated a bit, and then in the far north currently there's a contract that's been linked that one of the potential delivery companies that could deliver it was prepared to do it for half the value, and the attributes should have. Is this confidential?
We're in the public portion of the meeting now, but I think this is obviously an interesting conversation that can be picked up later. For now, I am going to note that we have a recommendation that the report Fraud, Corruption and Dishonesty Risk Report by Mandy Tepania, Audit and Assurance Lead and dated 16 February 2024 be received. Kua tukua e Jack te mōtini. The motion has been moved by Jack. Kua tautoko hia e Jeff. It has been supported by Jeff. Ka whakairi hia te rā mōtini ki runga. I put that motion up for voting. Te hunga e whakai ana ki mai ai. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Te hunga e whakahe ana ki mai kāore. Those that are not in favour, please let me know. Anyone not in favour? Well then, the motion is carried. Kia ora mai anō tātou. We will now move to item 6.7 on the agenda, the Risk Deep Dive Report, which is speaking directly to the cybersecurity matter that we have raised earlier in the meeting. We're on page 74, and we're going to be hearing from Mandy and Bruce. Kia ora tātou, page 74.
Kia ora, Chair. I'm happy to lead this out.
Ka pai.
And unfortunately, the IT staff that I had invited to this meeting are not able to be here today. So if there's any real in-depth questions, I might need to refer back to them rather than try and make it up. I don't claim to be an IT expert. However, we've just put out there, some of the underlying causes, and they're quite broad, but also our current treatments. And reflecting on some of the earlier discussion on this meeting, I think it would be sensible for us, or good for us, to bring back our continuity plan or our instant response and recovery plan relating to our IT systems in relation to cybersecurity. I think it'd be good for us as management to have the input from the members as to, is that plan sufficient, or what else should we be doing in that space? And I'd like to bring it back to the next meeting, or if that's not timely, the meeting after, just to ensure that we can get some oversight on that plan. Come on.
Ka pai, any comments regarding this paper? It is for us to receive the report, the recommendation that is. We can take it as read. I think we've kind of discussed its content earlier in the meeting as well when we were discussing other risks that were related to this paper earlier. So if I can have a mover, please, for.
I'll move it.
That's moved by Deanne.
Yeah.
To the meeting. Te hunga e whakaia ana ki mai ai. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say or no, or I'm against, or something like that. We have nobody that is against. The motion is carried. Kia ora.
Wai atu mai. Ngā koe whatu.
Okay, and now we have our health and safety quarterly report on page 77. The recommendation from the staff is that the report Health and Safety Quarterly Report by Tasman Sutherland, Health and Safety Advisor, and Beryl Steele, Human Resources Manager, and dated 16 February 2024 be received. Mā wai te rā mō tini e tuku. Who will move that motion?
I will.
Moved by Deanne. Mā wai te rā mō tini e tautoko. Who will support that motion? It is seconded by George. We have a mover and a seconder. We'll now put the report before us all for any discussion.
Just a primary discussion we had yesterday to raise it again today around looking at our appetite for risk in terms of our rating system severity. I think that came up yesterday, Bruce, around understanding more of what our appetite in that area is. So if we can just note in this meeting, maybe if we could get the information around what that appetite is for risk in terms of the health and safety. And for those that weren't present, it was more to do with, which one was it, Bruce? I'm just trying to think.
Dan, is that the bringing back the critical risks and their kind of assessment and the rating of them to understand where we're at and what we're doing?
Yeah.
And I think it would be timely for us at the next meeting to bring that back to this table, the critical risks.
Yeah.
So for health and safety, so we can actually go through those with the members and see what your thoughts are on what our approach to those are.
I do believe that this is the same report that we received
Yesterday.
at the council meeting yesterday. So taking on board the conversation that we had at the council meeting yesterday, perhaps our staff can follow up in that respect. Do we have a mover and seconder for the health and safety quarterly report?
I'll move.
We've got Joe. Oh, do we? No, we already have Deanne and George, right? Right. If there's no further comment, having already discussed this in detail yesterday, I will put that motion to the meeting. Ka whakairihia te rā mō tini ki runga. Te hunga e whakaia ana ki mai ai. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Te hunga e whakahea ana ki mai kahore. Those that are not in favour, please let the meeting know. There is nobody that is not in favour of the motion. The motion is carried unanimously. Kia ora tātou. We will now move on to item 6.9, which is the AI policy on page 83, noting that this is in draft and we've had a little bit of conversation earlier. The recommendation is that the report AI policy by Bruce Howes Taumata, Group Manager Corporate Services, and dated 16 February 2024 be received. Do we have a mover for that recommendation? Moved by Steve. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Joe. Would we like any further discussion? That's now I will hear from Deanne. Kia ora, Deanne.
So just on that, Bruce, have we sought legal council around this policy. I mean, it's a really critical piece of information using AI because it's not owned or used primarily in New Zealand. Around the risks of that, have we sought legal counsel around this policy?
No, we didn't seek legal counsel. We looked at a collection of other policies throughout New Zealand that are currently in place and looked at good practice and put together this policy on that basis, taking into account things like the Privacy Act, copyright law, and things like that. So we haven't undertaken a legal review.
May I suggest, because it is a online based and unprotected in some spaces technology, that we look to legal counsel, because we've got the cyber, we've got the cyber liability insurance, and we've got some other policies. I just think because it's fairly new, your risk is if you're talking into this saying to me, please write me an email that says something like this, and then it goes back and it goes through here. Well, it actually goes somewhere off this web, and you would know more about this through the chair around AI than I would, but I just think it's a real critical piece for us to take through legal counsel.
To get some review, some independent review of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, Deanne, particularly when we look at how data is harvested, what mechanisms we have in place or pathways we have in place here at the council for landowners, whānau, hapu, iwi, to repatriate data as well. For example, data that we harvest on waterways, data that we harvest where hosts are concerned, aquifers are concerned, or even native plants are concerned. And if we look at what happened in Kaikohe not too long ago with the natural significant areas and the way that people reacted to data being harvested off their properties without their knowledge, I think that speaks to what you're raising to our attention too, which is data sovereignty, and that's covered somewhat in the draft policy. But the Māori impact, I think, is something that we want to better explore, particularly where we say in this policy that, we understand that data is a taonga. I think how do we understand the importance of connecting respective people or organisations with that taonga. And so I'll just hark back to legislative compliance and the Treaty Settlement Acts that we have a commitment to upholding, so that in that respect we're connected to our legislative compliance as well. I know that here we're talking about copyright, we're talking about privacy and all that sort of jazz, but there are other things for us to consider as well. And I think this is a good start for us to get across the detail, because it will be something that evolves, particularly around authorship. And when we think about machine learning and the specific contexts that we might use or may not use AI in, data mining, the regulations around use, what is the trend there? And if the public mood was to drastically change around the use of these tools, how are we going to pivot and align with what the public mood evolves to be? So just wanted to mention that, because we do talk, we know that fair use is a different story, but fair dealing are these other things as well that we need to just take into account. I don't have any further comment on it. It's something that I kind of talk about a little bit every time it comes up. But if there's no other further comments, perhaps we will receive the report and just continue to work with our staff to ensure that things are covered there. We have a mover and a seconder, moved by Steve, seconded by Joe. Ka whakairihia tērā mō tini ki runga. I put that motion to the meeting. Te hunga e whakaai ana ki mai ai. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Te hunga e whakahe ana ki mai kahore. Those against, please say that you're against. Nobody is against. That motion is carried. Kua tau tērā mō tini. Kia ora tātou. We now move to the business with the public excluded. That is item 7.0. Hei hoa.
We're not live streaming, Margaret.
Stop. Kia ora tātou. Yeah, it's not back on it.
And yeah,
Halfway?
it's not done it.
Yeah, I'm over here. So if you click on
Okay,
here.
and then I went there,
Yeah,
and then I go
stop.
stop.
See stop?
Yeah.
Halfway.
Fine.